Welcome to Hooper and Sanford, where storytellers are made. It is the revamped podcast from the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia. I'm your host, Dayne Young, a 2011 alumnus of the University of Georgia and currently a PR specialist on staff at the college. In this episode, we have a conversation with Tutor Vlad, the director of the Cox International Center, which is housed here at Grady College. He has a long history of helping international journalists overcome their obstacles, whether political or otherwise, to make sure that they're able to do their reporting for the citizens of their countries. It is a timely conversation with some of the news out of Afghanistan from recent weeks. Also, Tudor himself just has a fascinating personal story about how he found journalism. Here's a conversation with Tutor Vlad. We welcome in Tutor Vlad. He is the director of the Cox Center, housed at Grady College here at the University of Georgia. And Tutor, I get to see you on occasion in the hallways, though not as frequently in the midst of a pandemic the last 18 months. And I'm always delighted to hear about the work that you and your team are doing. So I'm just curious how the last 18 months has been in terms of international training for journalists, because I know there's been a lot of challenges.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me as a participant in this conversation. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you as much as I know about the center and about international media. This COVID time has been extremely difficult for the Cox International Center. And I would like to give you just a little background about this center because it is unique in journalism education in the United States. The James M. Cox Jr. Center for International Mass Communication Training and Research, this is the long name for the Cox International Center, was founded in 1985. And the main goal of the center has been to support democracy by fostering freedom of speech and freedom of the media around the world. Now, I told you that this is a unique institution. There are some other organizations in the United States that focus on international journalism and international communication. IREX, which is the International Research and Exchanges Board, or the International Center for Journalists, are two of them, but none of them is located in a university. The Cox International Center is the only unit that focuses entirely on international media and communication and is located within a journalism program in the United States. And so we are proud that the center has done more than 130 programs in the last 20 years. And we've had journalists, journalism communicators, government communicators, NGO leaders from more than 60 countries participating in these programs. But as I said, to come back to your question, it has been very difficult because many organizations in the emerging democracies where we do most of our work want to have these training programs in person. They are not so willing to have the training sessions online. And we have been in a position where we had to postpone and even to cancel some of these programs. Hopefully things will get better, but again, it has not been an easy time for the Cox Center.
How often do you have participants from past programs and past trainings contact you or someone else affiliated with the Cox Center about how to deal with a specific situation? So I'm thinking in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, if journalism or information is being withheld or access withheld, have you had any of those questions come to you within the last 18, 20 months?
Oh, absolutely. We have many friends, based on these training programs. And, there is value to these in-person programs because this is how you build trust. Sometimes, people, when they hear, oh, some Americans will come and do the training for us, they become a little suspicious. But when they see that actually what we are doing during these programs is an exchange of ideas, we don't go there and say, we know what you need to do. We go there and say, we want to hear from you, and we want to share our own experiences without saying that they are good or they fit for your organization. So because we build this high level of trust, then people come back to us. And they also know that we have a huge database about journalism training, about journalism education, and they want to learn about our, experiences. Also, we have been involved in a program that is called the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, working with more than 2,000 young African leaders. And they have constantly come back to us saying, look, here are the situations, here are the challenges that we are facing. What are your opinions about this?
I'd love to hear a little more just about your background, Tudor. And in fact, it's probably some information that I haven't heard. I know a lot of it stems back to a journalism career in Romania, but could you kind of connect the dots from your education, higher ed, or wherever it may be, and then how you got to UGA?
Oh, absolutely. First, I want to tell you that in one of my previous lives, I was a professional tennis player. That's how I started. But then I decided that I wanted to be a journalist. That was in communist Romania, where there was no school of journalism. Well, actually, there was only one, but it was highly ideologized. So I graduated from the School of Literature at the most important university in Romania. And then I got my PhD at the university in Bucharest with a focus on the history of the movie in Romania. I worked for 10 years during the communist regime as a journalist, and then 10 years after the fall of communism. And I cannot even tell you which one was the most difficult period. Both were extremely challenging, but an extraordinary learning experience. After the fall of communism in 1992, I was invited to start a journalism program at the largest university in Romania. And again, it was a huge challenge. As I mentioned, no previous experience in journalism education, no textbooks, no professors. So that it was not easy to start that program. And I chaired that program for about 10 years until I came to the University of Georgia in 1999 as a senior Fulbright scholar. I came here to the Cox Center, and after a while, the then director of the center, Dr. Lee Becker, and I agreed that this is a good place for me to work because I had the experience of a journalist in a totalitarian system, and then in a post-totalitarian system. And this was something that was needed for the center that was very active at that time after the fall of communism in Eastern Central Europe and in the former Soviet space.
Obviously, when you start talking about the journalism in communist nations or post-communism, journalism is all about bringing truth, bringing light to the truth, making sure that people understand what is going on, and holding people in power accountable. I know you said that you don't know which was more difficult, covering the post-communism or covering communism itself. What about that do you think kind of shaped who you are as a journalist now? Because I think that's one of those things, even if you read about it in a textbook, you really don't understand it unless you've experienced that, correct?
That is a very, very good question and remark, Dayne. I think what I've learned from my personal experiences is that being a journalist is not easy. It doesn't matter where you are. Being a journalist and doing a good job is not easy. During the communist experience, we had to fight the censorship. We had to identify a second language, if that's, I mean, writing between the lines so that the readers understand what we want to say. Immediately after the fall of communism, we had to face a very different challenge because there was no advertising market to support the media. So we had to learn how to make our media survive during all those times. And sometimes, we had to make compromises. It has not been easy. As I said, I don't know exactly which one was the most difficult period. But what I've learned more than that is to understand that there are people all over the world who want to do a good job of communicating, of covering important issues. And, we are somehow privileged in the United States because the worst case scenario, someone, a journalist, can lose her or his job here. But in so many other countries, journalists are exposed to much more difficult situations. In the former Soviet space, it's many times about the life of a journalist. So these people are very brave, and we need to value their work and we need to respect their work.
Do you sometimes get a little worried just about how hyperbolic some of the journalism in America is mentioned of people saying, well, this feels like communism or this feels like censorship, when in reality, based on the definitions that you're telling me, it's not close to approaching that we've seen in the past. Does that worry you, how hyperbolic that can be?
Absolutely. I'm concerned I see people very often, almost every day on the TV using these words like totalitarian, censorship, communism, without knowing exactly what they are talking about. At the same time, I'm also concerned about the polarization of the media in the United States and about the potential effects of this polarization in the midterm and long term.
What are the early warning signs that journalism or journalists may not be allowed to do the work that they should be able to do, whether it be by government factors or whatever environmental factors are involved in prohibiting them from, shining light on the truth?
IREX, the organization that I mentioned that is located, the headquarters are located in Washington, D.C., has produced every year now for more than 10 years, something that they call the Media Sustainability Index. So not the Freedom of the Media Index, but the Media Sustainability Index. And I think this is a very important nuance. I think it is very difficult to have a vibrant media system in places where the advertising market and the sales cannot support those media. There are still countries where the government can direct the advertising. If they cannot control the media directly as they used to do it during the communist regime through censorship, they can do it through more subtle strategies. Like, many countries have many companies that are state-owned. In those cases, the government can decide where these companies will direct their money for advertising. Or, we constantly talk about the government as the main factor that controls the media. It's not always the case. In some countries, like in Russia, like in Ukraine, there are the oligarchs, the major business groups that control the media. They fund the media and they use them as attack dogs. So the government is less powerful in controlling the media, but the major business groups can do it.
In your career, how have you seen social media and the ability for anyone with a phone and an internet connection to share a message? Because that's still relatively new technology in the spectrum of media. How have you seen that impact the open access for journalists, but then also citizen journalists?
You know, it's interesting. In my opinion, the social media are some kind of equalizer between countries with very different media systems and with different levels of media freedom. Countries in Africa, for instance, where the government still controls a lot of the resources, have shown that people there, people especially working for NGOs, have been extremely innovative in using social media to bring important issues to the attention of the public or to the attention of the local or central government. So sometimes, you know, you have to learn from these people and from these organizations in emerging democracies on how creative they are in using the social media, you know, to compensate for little resources and for little access to the traditional media.
Well, let me ask you this then. Do you think your experience in Romania would have been different had you had social media as a resource and a tool?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, we have to look at the so-called Arab Spring and evaluate the use of social media there and how powerful those media are. Though I have to add, because there are some books that deal now with the Arab Spring, that Al Jazeera, which is a traditional media organization, has also been very impactful there and has also guided a little the people who are using the social media.
As we're recording this, the news of the day, so to speak, in terms of just the global politics, military, is all about Afghanistan, the United States military withdrawing from there, and then Afghanistan really being in quite a shift right now in terms of who's in control, who has power. How do you see that? Maybe not necessarily as a media market itself, but when you're watching coverage of this and seeing information come from Afghanistan, this is a 20-year process of the United States going in and then now withdrawing. What do you look for in terms of what these journalists are now going through there?
You know, I'm pretty pessimistic about the short-term future of the media in Afghanistan. You know, the last 20 years have created a media system there. It has been far from being perfect, but there are at least, at this time, there were at least 1,900 media organizations in Afghanistan. The local level, regional level, some at the national level, some funded by the United States, some funded by other entities. It has not been perfect at all, but it has provided a plurality of voices. I'm not saying that it was a free media system, because the government controlled a lot. Some journalists were put in jail. On the other side, the Taliban were, you know, constantly menacing the journalists. But still, we had this plurality of voices, and people were able, you know, at least to get some information from different sources. What will happen next? It's really hard to predict, but clearly, you know, in terms of media freedom, it's going to be a a decline.
What advice would you give to a journalist, maybe in Afghanistan, maybe not specifically, but if they're going through a regime change in a war-torn area, what advice do you give them on how to complete their job and their task, understanding that in what you're saying, in a lot of cases, not only their freedom is at risk, but in some cases their life and livelihood?
Well, the first advice is to be cautious and to understand exactly what the main forces are. And it's also interesting to, to think that even within a country, there are differences in terms of media freedom and in terms of how free the journalists are. For instance, in China, you can find many local and regional media organizations who are doing a pretty good job, while the central media are more under the control of the central government. Or in a country like Russia, print media are pretty independent because the circulation is not, spectacular, and the central government thinks that there's no reason to control print media, but the censorship is much tougher for the television that has, a large audience. So there are nuances from a country to another, from a region to another, and always the journalist has to understand exactly what the main forces that try to control the media are, and what are the resources that they can count on.
Here in America, if you look at any of the polling data in recent years, it shows that there's more increased mistrust in media by the public. And I know that our college is doing a lot of research in what is causing that mistrust in media sources and in journalists, and then trying to find ways to combat that. Do you see those same trends happening internationally, or is it just a different playing field to begin with?
Well, I've seen in Europe the same trend of polarization of the media and of people who watch the news not to get the information to learn about what's new, but to get confirmation for their ideological or personal beliefs. And this is a concern because I'm not sure if the media have created this situation or the media is responding to this situation by offering the viewers but what the viewers want to see or what they want to hear. But this is really a concern because sooner or later people will start asking where exactly they need to go to find, reasonably independent news sources.
So in your training of journalists, how do you advise them to do this in a way to create trust with their audiences?
Well, what our students learn here is exactly what they should. And we are talking about, the neutrality. We don't use the term of objectivity so much, but we are talking about the journalist as being neutral in most of the cases. But when you go abroad, you find sometimes the situation where the journalist cannot stay neutral because he or she is witnessing so many, wrongdoings that they feel that they need to take a side. And so this is a constant dilemma when we are doing these programs, how much we focus on objectivity, on being neutral when you provide the information, and on the other side, on when the journalist needs to take position and even become an advocate for a main important issue.
Let's finish up with kind of the next steps for the Cox Center and what your team is working on. I know international travel right now still has its limitations as the pandemic and different variants, and I'm sure there will be a time where that can resume more and that work can be done in person better. But either short term or long term, what are the visions of the Cox Center and the goals that you all are trying to achieve?
Well, we have some projects. Two of them are online, and I mentioned one of them, the Mandela Washington program. We are constantly working. We have created several online courses for young NGO leaders in Africa. The programs are focusing on digital storytelling and on developing new business models. And some of our colleagues in the Grady College have been very helpful. Valerie Boyd, Keith Herden have participated in these programs. We have another program, a partnership with two other units at the University of Georgia, the Carl Vinson Institute of Government and the Fanning Institute, where we are creating an online African Civic Engagement Academy. We help, again, NGOs there, but also government communicators develop new strategies to promote important issues via multiple communication channels. And we will also host 25 journalists from the country of Georgia for a 3-week program. And so we also hope that sooner rather than later, we will be able to travel again to China and to the former Soviet space and continue our work there.
Tudor, you have a fascinating career in your background. I always love hearing you and chatting with you, and you're just so gracious in what you do. The next step is I need to get on a tennis court with you, even though I'm sure you would beat me with your history in that. I need to go just sit in your office one day and hear some more stories of your early tennis career.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you and with your audience some of the work of the Cox International Center, the international unit of the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication.
We thank Tutor Vlad for his time here on the Hooper and Sanford podcast. With so many obstacles in the way of journalists, whether it be medical or political, it's fascinating to hear how the Cox Center is helping equip journalists with the tools needed to overcome those challenges. Until next time, here on the Hooper and Sanford podcast, I'm Dayne Young.